Hey, Ashley,
Hi, Leah.
you're the big fat book writer.
That's right.
I'm
Thanks
so
for having
excited
me.
to be talking to you tonight. This is just great. I just got back to Asheville. I've been away for a couple of months, and I'm just thrilled that I get to come back to the place that I love with a book that I love and a bookstore that I love. Y'all, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm hoping that you'll ask some questions of Ashley. I can I rave about you just a little bit before I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. So I was given kind of randomly given an advance copy of this book a few months back by the wonderful Meg Reed at Hub City Press, which is a fantastic press out of South Carolina that you should all follow and buy books from. And I didn't know anything about it. And Meg said, "Hey, read this." And I just thought I was just so compelled by it and just found the prose to be so beautiful. And I was like, who is this person? And so I was very excited to get to read it ahead of time. And sorry, I'm a little distracted because my cat's feeder went off. So that means that there will not be cat butt on the screen tonight. That's a good sign. Anyway, it's a wonderful book, and I'm so excited to talk to you. And I want to just maybe ask you to introduce yourself to the audience tonight and tell us a little bit of, give us like an overview of the book. What's it about?
Yes. Thank you so much for those kind words. And I'm glad your cat is there somewhere in the background. So yes, I'm Ashleigh Petersen. I'm the author of The Crocodile Bride. This book is about a little girl named Sunshine Turner, and it is the summer that she turns 12 years old. And it's in that same summer, some traumatic things happen in her life. And to cope with them, she turns to this myth that she's grown up hearing from her troubled but charismatic father, Billy, about a woman who lives in the woods and has healing hands and her mysterious relationship with a crocodile in those woods. I think that's the gist of it. It was a 10-year, from first draft to final draft, it was a 10-year labor of love. So
Oh, wow, 10 years. Okay, so we'll talk about that later, or maybe
yeah.
somebody, one of the viewers tonight can ask about that process. So I want to start with just asking you a really specific question that maybe can lead you to read the opening passage of the book, which is so beautiful and which caught me just from the first few words. You're, this is a multi-generational narrative from different characters' perspectives, but we have Sunshine. We have this amazing character named Sunshine, and she's this incredible protagonist, and she is at that cusp of maturity, or for lack of a better term. And I'm so interested in the way you handle childhood and the interiority of that kind of coming of age voice. Can you talk? Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to tell us about that, or do you want to just read us the opening of the book and then talk about it?
I'll start with reading and then
Okay.
yeah, I would love to chat more about it. Sure.
Great.
So I'll read the first page or two, if that's okay. I'll try to keep it relatively brief. I know we're on Zoom and sometimes limited attention spans. So this is chapter 1 from The Crocodile Bride. It's called Staying Modest. This is June 1982. Sunshine was standing waist deep in the lake when she discovered the stones trapped inside her chest, one behind each bare nipple. They felt raw and tender in the cold water, so she stood and cupped her palms against each to soothe them. And that's when she felt them there, two strange, tucked away treasures. Aunt Lou hated the word nipple and instead said buttons when she had to call them anything at all. She also hated the words fart and anus, and for some reason, nostril and toenail clippings. JL said these words whenever she got the chance, just to get on her mother's nerves. Always at great risk, Sunshine thought, since Aunt Lou did not like it when JL got smart. If Sunshine's own nipples worked like real buttons, she could unfasten each one, pluck out the misplaced stones, and pocket them for safekeeping. But even through her goggles, she could see that the nipples themselves were bigger. No longer buttons at all, but two pink, puffy mounds. Underneath were the stones, and she could push them back and forth a bit, just like with her kneecaps. Only her kneecaps had been there all along, and these stones were what JL would call une surprise, une surprisa. Speaking French was another way for JL to annoy her mama. Aunt Lou insisted that JL and Sunshine never mistake themselves for Cajuns. The Turners, she said, were swamp people only in proximity and not at heart. JL only ever replied with a mournful, oui, and pretended to take a drag of a cigarette. The morning was swollen with humidity, like overripe fruit about to burst. On their walk to the lake, steam had curled off the grass that grew in the ditches along Only Road. They'd crossed into the woods and strolled single file down the path, carrying towels and cans of ginger ale and peanut butter sandwiches and the half-deflated yellow inner tube. Blue stem tickled their bare legs, and the pines smelled sweet. As they walked, JL had said, "I'm glad it's just us. I like it when it's just us." And Aunt Lou pretended to react with shock. "My daughter saying something nice? Sunshine, call a doctor." By the time they reached the lake, JL was ignoring them both, lips puckered like she'd sucked on a sour wedge of lemon. Instead of playing beauty pageant or swimming with Sunshine, she'd flopped back on her towel and declared she was going to get so tan that the pale skin underneath her freckles caught up to the color of the freckles themselves. "I'm going to be one smooth color by the end of today," she said, closing her eyes, "like caramel." Aunt Lou told her this was A, impossible, and B, would mean Joanna Louise should be careful what she wished for, as her freckles were a bit on the orangey side. Might wind up an Oompa Loompa, Aunt Lou cautioned. Now, as Sunshine stood in the water, confused and excited by her discovery, JL was still lying belly up on the nearby shore, roasting in the sun. Sunshine squinted toward her and saw something else she hadn't noticed before. JL had breasts. 2 apple halves beneath an olive green bikini top. Little green hills on a flat, pale landscape. I'll stop there.
I muted myself. I love that opening so much, and the word choice especially, which we can talk about later. But so thank you for reading that. Can you talk a little bit about, because it's not in first person, right? But I feel so close to Sunshine, and I feel so on her shoulder in this. Can you talk about some of your craft choices for capturing her?
Yeah, this was one of my favorite parts of writing the book, was connecting with Sunshine's voice. The book, as I said, it was, from start to absolute finish, a 10-year labor of love. And it was a really long road. The first 2 years of it were really spent kind of floundering, which I can talk about at some other time. But in that time, I wasn't sure who the protagonist was. And Sunshine, really in the first year and a half, was more of a peripheral character. At some point, I wrote a chapter from her perspective, just kind of playing around with what that would be like. And I found this kind of childlike rhythm. And sentence rhythm is always something that keeps me interested and invested in writing. Mm-hmm. Once I found that rhythm, I just kind of felt it in my bones that was a voice I wanted to stick with. And she pretty quickly took over the whole story from there. All the other characters that I had thought were the main characters kind of fell away. And it became her story, and it became the story of the other women in her life. Yeah.
I'm glad you said rhythm, because that's something that I noticed, is that there is this distinct cadence to her, particularly her sections, but to the whole book. And word choice also. And was it a conscious, at what point in that decision-making process and in that long process that I know well, were you thinking about POV? Because I think this close third, where we're so close to her, but it's not first person, is so smart. And it's such a great way to present us with this younger character, because we get to have just enough distance to understand the gravity of some of the situations she's in. How was that? Did you know that right away, or?
I think that decision initially had to do with just the gut feeling that voice was the one that I wanted to stick with. Mm-hmm. And when I tried to squish it into first person, it felt too contained and almost like, I think to a certain extent, a first person character has to have blinders on. Right. And it felt a little too closed in for me. Right. So that was a part of it. It was just initially just kind of intuition, and then kind of feeling how closed in it felt. And there was something about that distance that you're talking about that gave a little bit of breathing room to the narrative, and gave a little bit of room for my own adult perspective to slide in there as well in a way that wouldn't have happened if I were very close with, I pronouns in full on first person mode.
Yeah, I think it's so smart, and it makes it so readable because you do have this wonderful balance of feeling so intimately close to this girl, but yet also there's this sense that the story understands her in the same way that I do as I'm reading her.
That's
like
great.
It feels wise at the same time that it's presenting her so accurately.
Great. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I think that's so smart, and it is really hard to do. It's so hard to do the coming of age thing and find a way to really approach it that feels fresh. And this book really does that. But we have all these other women too, though. Can you talk about some of the other women, and could we hear a little from? Because there's so many ladies in this book that I love.
Yes, definitely. So there's Sunshine's aunt who lives across the street from her, her Aunt Lou, who you just heard a little bit of in that initial chapter. There is also Sunshine's grandmother, Grandma Catherine, who appears throughout the book, sometimes in ghost form, sometimes in Sunshine's imagination, maybe, and certainly in storytelling form. And then we actually get chapters from Grandma Catherine's perspective. It's again somewhat close to her perspective. It isn't quite in the full-on voice that we have with Sunshine. So the whole novel is really comprised of alternating chapters and alternating segments of Sunshine's story, Aunt Lou's story, and Catherine's story. And I can certainly read a little excerpt from Catherine. Let me go ahead and pull that up. I'm not confident I marked this ahead of time, so just give me a moment. In fact, I know I didn't.
Do you need me to randomly say things while you...
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something interesting to say while you flip through the book. Have you got it?
I think I've got it. it. Okay, so this comes a bit later. This is chapter 5. And this is the first time we hear from Catherine's perspective. This chapter is called Goldfish Keepers. Before she plastered the walls of what would become the children's bedroom with green wallpaper strewn with daisies, she was not Catherine Turner, but Catherine Elise Booker of Portland, Tennessee. She was born in 1919, just as the country tipped gratefully forward into a new decade and away from the First World War. Both her father, a veteran turned postman, and her mother, a schoolteacher, were already in their early 40s and had reconciled themselves, having tried and miscarried several times already, to a childless life. That their infant daughter arrived splotchy-faced and wailing, head thick with her mother's red hair, was a pleasant and welcome surprise. Perhaps she sensed from a young age the heartache her parents had already endured from their miscarriages. Or perhaps she sensed the illness slowly rising in her father. Whatever the reason, Catherine seemed to understand from infancy, with the exception of her screeching entry into the world, that it was best to keep quiet, best not to disrupt. As a baby, she slept through the night and kept to a reliable feeding schedule. In school, she raised her hand and did not speak until spoken to, and even then, she did so quietly. She minded her mother, whose sternness and reserve made her a beloved grammar school teacher and a distant parent. In the evenings, Catherine sat on the arm of her father's reading chair, head leaning against his, and listened as he taught her about the plants he studied in his spare time. The Bookers lived in a white house with green gingerbread trim on a spacious corner lot, where the only disruption to the property's general sense of peace came when the Malverns' territorial rooster, Pontius Pilate, made his way up the sidewalk and attacked any animal or human who happened to be nearby. Catherine preferred the backyard anyway. On summer days, she lay in the grass between her father's garden plots and played pretend with Rosie, a rag doll with black yarn for hair and mismatched button eyes, one brass, one shaped like a rose. Together, she and Rosie sometimes explored a narrow, tangled thicket of woods that bordered their yard, and seemed, when Catherine was very young, to be vast. They discovered the hollow of a huge old oak big enough to sit inside of and hid from imaginary dangers. There were witches and ghosts. There was a prowling wolf. She could hear its heavy footfall nearby, slow and menacing. Catherine brought treasures inside the hollow and lined them up around herself and Rosie in protective circles. A tarnished baby spoon, stones she'd once found in the creek at the edge of Portland and brought back home in the pocket of her skirt, acorns, a rusted old key. The hollow smelled sweet and mineral, of rotting wood and the earth that dirtied her clothing. Many years later, when she moved to the place called Fingertip, the sweet scent of rotting wood she sometimes encountered along the piney paths and the smell of mud along the road or along the shore of the lake would take her back to the hollow of that oak tree and the bliss she had found there in the company of Rosie and of her own imagination. There.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're reading that about the experience of this book is experiencing kind of the cycle, if for pardon the term, or maybe the pun is intentional, the cycles of femininity and the cycles of this family. And can you talk a little bit about that, about the structure of the book and about how there's a cumulative effect here, like no spoilers, but we're going through a series of circles with these women, right?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that and noticing that. The sort of intertemporality of these characters' lives. So our grandma Catherine and then her daughter Lou, to some extent, Lou's brother Billy as well. To a great extent, actually, although we don't hear from him in a close perspective sense. And then Sunshine herself. So Grandma Catherine's granddaughter, Sunshine. So these three generations and these women in these generations, this sense of interconnectedness and intertemporality was really important to me. So through the structure of the novel is not only in alternating chapters, but also in sections. So sometimes you'll be in Sunshine's section and then there's a little bit of a space and then we move into Aunt Lou's section or we move into Grandma Catherine's section. And that was something I had to work with a lot because it can get confusing for readers to a degree that I didn't want. I think readers are also smart and will figure it out, but I did work with it.
Yeah, it's not hard to follow at all. I think.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's great to hear.
It took also because you have timestamps in it where it's easy to tell,
yes.
Oh, because they're in that kitchen. I know where.
Yeah. Sorry. Cool. No. I appreciate saying that. Yeah, that was something I also tried to kind of, weave together little.
I'm sure that was hard to put together
too. Yeah. To ground the reader in time and space. But that sense of going back and forth between time was important because I think one of the themes that was really important to me to explore in this book was the way that our family histories trickle down to us, the way certain themes in families get recycled over and over until we find a way to break some of the more negative patterns there. I think that answers your question.
Yeah. But it really is. It's like this, and I think for the reader, there's an empathy that comes with that because you can see the pattern repeating, and yet at the same time, you totally understand. Especially for women readers, I think will really identify with that. And it is really easy to follow, and you can distinguish between these characters. But I think I want to ask you about this because I feel like this is getting also to context, right? And the femininity, the context of the type of femininity or femininities that you're examining. Mm-hmm. Because I see this so much as a book that's about Southern childhood and about the ways that place and specific places in the South screw us up as women. And being a product of that, I really understood so much of what's happening with Sunshine, and so many of the decisions that I find frustrating in the older female characters. I understand it because I've seen it, because I've experienced it with women in my life. So we're on Only Road. Y'all, we're on Only Road. That's the name of the road. Can you talk a little bit about setting and why this particular place, where we are, so readers know, and how that plays into this?
Yes, definitely. Oh, yeah. I have so much to say about this. So this is set in the Deep South. My ancestors are scattered all over the Deep South, particularly Alabama, which this novel is set in Louisiana, not Alabama, but also Portland, Tennessee. So the Portland, Tennessee that appears in my novel is a very fictionalized version of an actual small town, Portland, Tennessee. And then Fingertip, Louisiana is entirely fictional. But the South feels very deep in my bones. I think there's a reason that I keep writing about the South. And for me, and the way that I grew up, the South is almost inextricably tied with a couple ideas. And one of those ideas is more traditional Christianity, like Southern Christianity. And another idea that it is inextricably tied with are more traditional gender roles. And that, I think, very heavily influenced my understanding of the characters in these novels and of their struggles. I think a lot of the characters in these novels fall into, in this novel, my novel, fall into these kind of traditional
You're
roles.
first.
Yes. Yeah. I think the characters in my novel fall into these traditional roles as women because that's what's expected of them, and also because it's their way of surviving. A couple different characters, and again, I don't want to give too much away, but Catherine makes a choice to get into a marriage in which she plays a very submissive wife, and it's destructive for her. And then our character Lou initially gets into a marriage in which she plays a very submissive role as wife. And it's also connected to Christianity for her in particular. So it's a way for both of them of escaping their current circumstances. And it is also something that winds up being powerfully destructive. They don't have a voice in those marriages. They have to kind of discover their voice as they, or attempt to discover their voice as they live out their lives. I would say those two ideas, like the gender roles and Christianity, were very heavily influential. And again, kind of inextricably tied up in the South. And not to say that's all the South is. I certainly know otherwise.
Right. Well, and that's not all the South is in this book either, because, and this is what I find so interesting about it, and what I like about it so much is that you are getting at these things that are, very central to a woman's experience, particularly in the Deep South. But that there, I don't know, do you like read much Thomas Hardy or people who use place as a character? Do you?
I have not.
Like
I'm very interested in the idea of place as a character. It's one of the things that hooked me when I was a younger writer.
Right.
I think a professor actually mentioned that idea in passing, and it lit this kind of spark in me.
Yeah, it's a real thing, and I first got onto that when I a million years ago when I was studying 19th century novels and got addicted to Thomas Hardy novels. And everybody hates Thomas Hardy because I think all his books are too obscure, and they're not. Most of his books are these amazing pastorals where who gives a shit about the people? Look at this heath, look at this forest, look at this, farmland, right? And he was also an architect by training, and so he would make buildings characters, and they had sentience and they had behaviors. And anyway, so to get back to your book,
I love it. No.
So talk about it all day. I really see this happening in Crocodile Bride because I feel like we are. The physicality of the space that these events are happening in these women's lives and girls' lives, it has presence. It's not just a backdrop, right? It has presence, and it feels so true to what I know. I'm not from Louisiana, but I've been there, and it feels so true to what that space feels like. And there's a magic and a doom that are happening at the same time that is weirdly I don't know, birthing and fostering these women at the same time that it's holding them back. And that dichotomy is such a big part of my own experience and a lot of Southern women writers experience of feeling like everything is pushing you out and helping you do this. Yeah. And at the same time, it's, an oppressive space. And my own writing is all about like regendering the rural South and thinking of it as a feminine space rather than a masculine space, which is a whole other conversation we're going to have with Malaprop someday. But anyway, can you, tell us about the character of Only Road. Tell us about the character of this house. Tell us about the character of this bayou.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with something that you just said about this sort of sense of possibility in the landscape,
Mm.
along with this oppressive quality, is something that when I was researching the book really struck me. So I went on, I talked about this at a recent reading, but I went on a couple different several different swamp tours, and it was always with the same company and the same guy leading the swamp tour. And I was like the most annoying participant, like like I think in all truth, I think we stayed out 45 minutes longer than we were supposed to because I was asking so many questions. I'm sure the other participants were like, who is this person? But I went on those tours because the guys who were leading them were so knowledgeable about this landscape, and landscape was central to the story, just this sense of the actual land. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I remember being really struck by when I was in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana on one of these swamp tours, and it was a gray, hazy morning. And I was so struck in this, it was on Bayou Teche. I was so struck in this landscape by how oppressive in some ways the landscape felt and looked. So it's all gray, the gray sky is mirrored in the gray water. And in this sense, there's this, again, just kind of oppressiveness, but it was teeming with
Yep.
life, just teeming. I mean, it couldn't, and
Feels
that,
so feminine, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
This is my
absolutely.
whole thing. This is what I write about all the time. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's beautiful. I love that. That's awesome. What a great observation. Yeah, it really did. And the guys on the swamp tour, part of why I couldn't stop asking questions is because they were so knowledgeable about every single tiny little thing. Like they'd reach into the water and pull out a handful of frog bit, which I've since tried to look up. I think that it might have a different name. Like I think that might be a more colloquial name. In any case, it appears in my novel, so hopefully I was accurate about that. But he'd be like, this is frog bit, and this is pennywort, and this is such and such, and this is such and such. It's often like under the surface of the water, like you can't even see it. That's certainly true of the alligators too. You just kind of see their little, well, sometimes not so little heads or eyes, like part of their head peering out over the edge of the swamp. So there was that dichotomy, and it was so rich to me. And there was also this sense of all of that life. And the fact is that in Louisiana, because of the tremendous deforestation, the water is taking over the land. So there
Right.
was a huge catastrophe of all of these cypress trees being demolished in this incredibly short period of time in the
Mhm.
1800s. And that has forever impacted the way that Louisiana will experience weather and weather catastrophes.
Right.
So there was a sense of beauty and of life, and also this knowledge that this is a land that is being quite literally swallowed by water.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something also that this book does such a good job of um, is you're getting at these really deep and significant issues about climate and about misuse of land and kind of patriarchal ways that the land in the South has been abused.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's it's just like it's this. I tie that so much to if we rethink of these spaces, these rural and these isolated natural spaces as being feminine, then you really start to think
Yes.
intersectionally about it, and you really start to realize like, oh, it's all one thing.
Yeah.
And there's so much power in it, and that's why and we got to keep that power down, right? Anyway,
Yes. No.
I'm getting political, but you know what I'm saying. It
Absolutely.
gets to all that stuff, and it does it so subtly and so in a way that I think you ease the reader into it so well. Would you read a little bit of like maybe a description of the Bayou? Could you do that? But I
Absolutely.
want people to hear how you describe that space, because I think obviously it's Asheville, and probably most of the people watching are not maybe familiar with that specific space, but there are commonalities between it and this region, just in the wildness of it and in the spookiness of it.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And I love that idea of the choices around the land being so patriarchal, because that is true, and is also very in line with some of the themes I was trying to explore in this otherwise.
And I should say, before you start reading, you do that in a way that is not, we have these wonderful men in the book too, these lovely men who are, trying their best.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, it's really, it's not it's just so interesting to see that landscape affecting people in a gendered way that is real and difficult and true to what I think we all experience, regardless of who we are. But anyway, did you find your passage?
Yeah, so I have a passage that I was going to read, but I'm thinking of this other passage that I wish I knew what page it was on in my own book, because I think it would be a little more relevant to what we're talking about here. But I don't want to spend too long looking. So let me just take a quick flip. If there's anything else you want to add, Leah, I'll see if Leah, I'm sorry, not Leah.
That's okay. Oh gosh, I don't know.
It's okay.
So this is the moment, right, when I wish that I had a cat, because I'm always so careful when I do these Zoom events to make sure that my cats have been put in another room and fed. And this is the moment, if there was ever a moment for our wonderful viewers at home to see a cat butt, this would be a great moment. And because I have some good cat butt in this house, and there's no, they're all far away and they've been fed and they're just like lazing on the floor somewhere.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot too. Well, Leah, honestly, I'll just read this section, because this is where some of the themes that we're talking about anyway kind of intersect. So there's, we talked about the deforestation and this story that Grandma Catherine tells. Grandma Catherine is the one who initiates the story of the Crocodile Bride that gets passed down through the generations. And this story takes place in the old growth forests of Louisiana. So I'll read just the very intro to that Crocodile Bride myth, because there is a little bit about the imagined old growth. It doesn't exist anymore, so far as I have been able to research, beyond like an occasional tree. I saw an old growth tree on that swamp tour and was very excited about it. But big swaths of old growth forest are no longer in existence in Louisiana. So I'll read this passage, and even without a cat butt interlude, I think we're okay here. So this is chapter 4, and it's called The Crocodile. Fingertip 1950s. Catherine Turner began the story in the yellow house, her children close against her body, one on each side. Her girl, 4 years old, with red, curly hair after her own. Her boy, just turned 6, with dark hair like his daddy's. Storytime was in one of the twin beds in the room her children shared. All around, the green wallpaper with daisies strewn across it. She had picked it herself, papered the walls herself, her son inside her belly. At story time, the green and the tendrilled flowers made Catherine feel they were inside a fairy tale. She began. A very long time ago, deep in the forest at the end of the road, was a place called the Black Bayou. In this bayou lived a very large, very old crocodile. Nobody knows how a crocodile came to be in this part of the world. There are no other crocodiles here, of course. Alligators, yes, but crocodiles are even more frightening. And this crocodile was larger and more ferocious than even the biggest alligator, and he was very lonely. The Black Bayou was as old as the sea and its water black as oil. All around it, the woods were green and wild, with cypress trees taller than any castle. In the summer, swarms of horseflies blotted out the sky, and snakes coiled in the shade of the sawgrass, and there were black bears and red wolves and wild boars with quick tempers. The ferns grew so thick on the forest floor that children were known to disappear inside of them, never to be seen again. Of course, the crocodile was never in danger. He was the king, and he ruled the black water and the forest that cupped the bayou shore like the palm of a hand. I'll go ahead and stop there. It's a little taste. Oh, you're on mute, Leah.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep myself quiet while you're reading, and I keep forgetting that I'm muting myself. It's just such a great, the descriptions are just so amazing, and it leads me to, unless you have anything else you wanted to say about setting, it leads me to another question I really want to ask you.
Yeah, thank you.
What is, I mean, I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it because people haven't read the book yet. What is the role of myth and magic in this book?
Oh man, a couple different roles, I would say. One, well, it's many layered, I think.
Yeah. I know that's a big question.
Yeah. One of the roles of myth and magic is related to survival and the stories that we tell ourselves and tell each other in order to survive. And in particular, the stories that these women tell each other in order to survive, and pass down. Although the Crocodile Bride story is also passed down through Billy, one of our troubled male characters. There's also this sense for me of the childlike possibility. And that was something. Sunshine's world is such an imaginative world. It felt impossible to tell her story without bringing some myth and magic into it.
Right.
She's at an age where magic still seems possible. She's at an age where she might believe a story if she kind of turns off the budding adult brain inside of her, and doesn't listen to, those more rational voices. Gosh, I mean, I could go on and on. Writing myth and magic is so important to me. It's a huge part of what keeps me interested in writing. Anytime I write something too realistic, I find myself bored by it. And so finding ways to weave something magical, or just the sense that there's some possibility of magic, is
Right.
a really integral part of my writing process.
It comes through. And this is really what I love about this book. And this is what I think I most want people to know about it, is that this is a realistic story, right? This is, kitchen sink stuff with ladies got it rough in the bayou, right? But this is a magic book, and this is a book about magic. And it just permeates it. And I can tell how important it is to you. And because it's something that also interests me, I feel really drawn through this as it feels like a myth, even though it is a very real and very realistic, and in some ways quite gritty story. And I just think that's so amazing. And
so nice.
I want, how can I kind of sum this up? Because I know we're running out of time, and I want to get to, if people in the audience have questions. But I guess I want to say that it's, in terms of just like getting people to understand and recommend and pre-order, and you should have the link. I'm sure Patricia or Stephanie put the link in, that if you think about all the things we've been talking about, right? Because this is the kind of stuff you can't say about yourself, because you'll sound like you're too proud of yourself, but I'll say it for you. When you're talking about women and Southern femininity and the difficult relationship we have with some kind of toxic Christianity in the South, and climate and ecology and coming of age, and also the location and the bayou and the folklore that comes with that. All these things are kind of synthesized by this magical quality that the book has. And so, the good books are the ones that are consistent, right? And across these themes and across these characters, this is the driver. And I just think it's such an interesting way to approach and read a story we know, and that I think will feel familiar to a lot of the people who are Malaprop's customers, but it's different, it's not the same. And it's because it's magic.
Thank you so much. That's such a compliment. Thank you.
But it's really what the book is doing,
Thank you.
It's objectively, it is a compliment because I like your book, but it is also like objectively, that's how the book is constructed. And I think it'll be fascinating to so many readers. It is 3:43, so I'm going to ask you kind of a brass tacks question about yourself, and then we'll see if people have participant questions, and I'll throw it back to Stephanie. I'm so curious about, because we don't know each other, and like I said, I just kind of got this book randomly and very kindly from somebody who was rightly thought I would like it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about why are you the person to write this? What's your deal?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Leah. Totally. And truly, thank you so much for reading. Yeah. Oh my gosh. What an honor. So I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in the suburbs of Virginia, so DC suburbs. But I grew up in a place, it was sort of a new development. So there were woods behind my house, and so much of the novel was me sort of borrowing from the imagination that I had at that age. My parents let us meander the woods. In retrospect, it wasn't a very big plot of woods, but it felt huge at the time as a 5-year-old, So I had a sense of connection to Southern landscape really from a very young age. I also grew up going to visit my aunt on a rural farm in nearby sort of Western Virginia, and then grew up going to visit various relatives further south of me, like North Carolina, South Carolina, et cetera. So there's a sense of, I think I said earlier, the South feels very deep in my bones. That is very much true. I'm located in Brooklyn now, but when I am in the South, I really feel it in this sort of very deep way that I think probably some people relate to, but that's hard to put into words. That's a part of, I think, why I told this story. And a part of it too is my relationship to my own family history and to learning at some point in my 20s and 30s, having this kind of light bulb moment of understanding myself through the lens of the women that had come before me, and seeing something in myself so clearly because I could suddenly see how it connected to the people who I came from. And that was it allowed me a lot more compassion for myself and certainly for them as well. When I saw like, oh, I'm not just my own little island born out of nowhere. I came from a family history and from various strengths and various problems, and those strengths and those problems trickled down to me too. Now I can name it and I have something to work with. And that understanding of myself was coming along as I wrote the novel. And so a lot of my own sort of self-reflection, a lot of therapy definitely wove its way into the novel as I told the story of a total very highly fictional story. But certainly my own sort of life experience was trickling in various fictional iterations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that feels, it does. It feels like fictional, but so real. And it is like all the best Southern novels. You got complicated people, you got a complicated place, and you're honest about those two things. And you have magic. And that's the perfect recipe for a good Southern book. I see Stephanie's face. Am I supposed to hand it off to you, Stephanie?
Hi, yes. If you still have another question, I'm also perfectly willing to hang out, but we do have a couple questions from the audience as well.
Why don't we do that, and then if we have time, I can ask one.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So thank you both, first of all. It's been great to listen to the two of you talk. Ashleigh, thanks so much for the lovely readings. And Leah, for your awesome questions, as always. And so I just want to circle back to something that y'all talked about at the beginning. And I feel like you just touched on this, Ashleigh, actually, because you had mentioned that the book was a labor of love and remind us again how long it actually sort of took from start to finish.
From start to total finish, it was 10 years.
10 years. So I want to invite you to tell us a little bit more about that and about that process for you and your writing process.
Sure. The process was very messy and very intuitive. It was messy in the sense that I had been a short story writer before this, and I had to really learn how to let go of my perfectionist instincts as a lover of sentences. You can get away when you're writing a short story with writing, sort of perfecting each sentence as you go along, and it doesn't slow down the process too much. I think otherwise now, but at least that was how I approached short stories at the time. And so a writer friend of mine basically sort of shook some sense into me and said, if you're going to write this novel, you have to let go of being such a perfectionist. These sentences aren't going to be here by the time you're several drafts down the line. And she was right. And so I really embraced the Anne Lamott shitty first draft mentality. If anybody has not read that essay, it's only about 2 pages long. I highly recommend. It's called Shitty First Drafts. And that is exactly what I did. I wrote an incredibly shitty first draft. And I can't emphasize it enough, especially if anyone out there is in the process of writing a first draft of a novel for the first time. It was a space, at times it was super difficult to embrace that mentality. However, that first draft was a space when I really let myself play. And it was terrible. I mean, if you read it now, the main character was a middle-aged man, which is hilarious because the story
is quite different.
Yeah, all women now. He was a middle-aged man. Sunshine was a peripheral character. There was one random chapter that I threw in there having zero idea of how it connected to anything. And it was about the Crocodile Bride. And I had when I wrote that first draft, I had truly no idea what it was doing in there. I just kind of, again, it was this kind of gut intuition. And because I'd embraced the shitty first draft mentality, I thought, you know what? If, okay, like, I don't know, this whole first draft doesn't have a plot and it has a random chapter about a crocodile and this woman who lives on this bayou, but so be it. And that was, in some ways, a really difficult way to write, and in other ways, a very freeing way to write, because it ended up allowing me, when I went in with the second draft, to really feel out for myself which of those threads I connected to and felt compelled to stick with. And that, in that second draft, is when I began, I mean, I say second draft, who knows how many there were and at which point in the process, but in those first 2 years, at some point, is when I just, I found myself drawn to certain storylines again and again. I found myself drawn to this little girl, Sunshine. She wound up being, of course, the protagonist of the novel. I found myself drawn to the sense of magic that Leah was talking about. That wound up being, of course, integral to the novel as well, and the title of it. So yeah, that's messy. That's how I would describe that tenure process.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that is something that I think is going to be so valuable to anybody who's watching this, or, now or later, who is an aspiring writer, or a writer, right, in general, who's carrying around any of that same perfectionism, or any of that stuff. Also, I'll Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, I'll post a link to that as well, to recommend to folks. And then we've got some questions from Joseph, who I know was one of the lucky people who got an early draft of the book, because he's asking some specific questions. And I don't know if any of it's a little spoilery, but I'm going to start with one that's like mostly just a big old compliment, which I think is awesome. Where he asks how you write such rhythmic and expressive prose, and whether or not that comes naturally.
Oh, that's a really nice compliment. Yeah. So a couple things. I mean, the first, to build off of what I was saying, embracing those early shitty first drafts. Eventually I do become a perfectionist, and I let that side of myself really cut loose on the latter drafts of the novel. So that's one way that happens. I'm so honored that anybody is picking up on the sense of rhythm. There's also just, I don't know where my understanding of sentence rhythm comes from. I have a couple guesses. I think one is just being such an avid reader as a kid. Probably like a lot of writers, just really a nose in a book at all times, deep into the hours of the night. And I think those words and language, eventually it just kind of seeps into you. And I think an understanding of how words work and the rhythm of words, for me at some point, just kind of, I think when I was little, I was just kind of like a sponge. I also just really love music. I'm a huge fan of music. I listen to it all the time. I've listened to it since I was a kid. I used to listen to it when I was falling asleep as a kid. And I also played music for a while. Not very good, but I did play it for a long time. And I think there's a sense of rhythm that came from that as well. It's one of the things, along with, like I was saying earlier to Leah, that sense of magic in writing. Even if the story is otherwise very ordinary and realistic, but this sense of possibility that there's some kind of magical element there. I feel that keeps me going as a writer, and the beauty of prose keeps me going as a writer. And so in those, last however many, probably 2 to 3 years is when I really let myself revise every sentence and kind of feel out the rhythm of how things landed on the page. And I get pretty obsessive about it, to be honest. But, I had to set aside that part of myself in order to get the book written initially.
Can I comment on this? Because I think this is a really I think so often when we do like reading and book events, we say, what's your process? And then but if you're not the writer, I can, because I read this book, I can kind of diagnose, like the English teacher in me can kind of see some things that you do that might be helpful for writers who are in the audience. One thing I would say is, I'm very curious if you've ever taken a prosody class or if you've taken classes in poetics, because I think there are poetic elements in the way you're using rhythm, and specifically things like assonance. There's a lot of assonance in your sentences. And the other thing that I think is so interesting, and this is just a tip for my fellow writers, is a lot of writers obsess about verbs and adjectives. Ashleigh, you're a noun girl. I'm serious. And you're reading along in a sentence, and it is the persons and places and things and objects, some of which are magical, that are the surprise in the sentence rather than the perfect adjective, right? So writers, don't forget your nouns, because they can make your sentences really special.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So I have not taken a prosody class, but I used to teach English, and I think, and I taught AP English, and so we looked really closely at poetry. We looked really closely at sentences. My students were always very sweet about letting me kind of nerd out on what a cool sentence was doing and pointing out all the intricacies of it, including things like assonance and consonants. And so that stuff is definitely with me when I'm in that perfectionist expressive mode. And then the other thing, a sixth grade English teacher taught me something that has always stuck with me. It was two things. One, she taught me to vary my punctuation, and I'm a psycho about it. Like I can't, if I see too many
punctuation,
right, it's like, or too many sentences with too many commas or whatever. So varying punctuation and varying the length and structure of sentences was something that she taught me how to do. And then I actually mentioned her in the acknowledgements as one of the reasons that I fell in love with sentence rhythm. I'm remembering this right now. And then another thing she taught was not beginning too many sentences in a row with the same word. So she would have us go through and circle the first word of each sentence in a paragraph, and we weren't allowed to repeat the opening word of any sentence in a paragraph. So
if I can get my grad students to do that, like my MFA students, I'm just going to make it do it.
Yeah, and it sounds kind of silly, but it did stick with me. I think along with kind of absorbing language as a kid, that was actually just a really practical way that I started writing and working to create more rhythm.
And that's a task you can give yourself late in the process.
Yes.
You like really edit yourself and really punch up your language once you have the novel written.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Leah, would you like to, we just have a couple of minutes left. And so I actually want to ask you, Leah, if you would like to talk a little bit about your process, since you've got so much great insight.
That's my process. I am not a person who writes every day, and I'm one of those people that will forgive you for not writing every day. And if you need someone to forgive you for that, I forgive you. Because I can't, because I am a very much the switch is on or it's off person in everything. And when I'm writing, I descend into a fugue state. I don't know for how long. 3 days later, I emerge. My hair is dirty. I'm in my underpants, and there's a short story. I don't know how. Right, I just go in, and which is not an organized way to live one's life. So I have that brain. I can't just dip in for an hour the way some people can. But I do think it helps to do it first thing in the morning. So I do recommend that. And the other thing that I think is really helpful for me is there's a rule for me that I'm not allowed to lead when I'm doing that shitty first draft. I'm not allowed to say, I'm going to write a story where a giraffe wins the World Cup, right? Which is a really good idea, by the way. Anyway, I just thought of that. What I do is I think of, I hear a line of dialogue, or something happens around me, or somebody says something cool. You know how you get an image that you get in your head. And what I do is I sit down and I just commit to following it rather than trying to lead it anywhere. So, the title story for my book, I just had this thing about somebody talking about being at a concert where somebody had one hand, or they had a missing hand. And I just sat and I didn't know what I'm going to do with that. And I just sit down and I go, okay, well, what would you say if you were going to tell somebody there was somebody like that at a concert? And I wrote that one. Like, well, who would say that? Well, where would they be? And I follow them rather than try to say, I'm going to write a story where this happens, right? So yeah, that's what I do. I go crazy in the mornings and I lead. I don't lead, I follow.
Thank you for that. Between the two of you, I just feel like this is, again, going to be really rich for writers, and also just really fascinating to hear for folks who don't write, right? To sort of get a peek inside of that, because when we appreciate writing, and the more we read, I think the more we are, whether we write or not, sort of curious about how that happens, right? It seems, by the time it gets on the page and we read it and it's sort of, this thing that affects our lives, it just seems like a miracle that springs up out of somewhere. And
it still is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is.
A miracle, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're both part of miraculous things and magical things, and we appreciate you. It's 1 minute after 7 on this clock, and so I just want to invite both of you to share any last words before we say goodnight to our audience. Another reminder, thank you, Leah, again, for reminding folks to pre-order the Crocodile Bride. There are links in the chat there. And if Malaprops is not your home store, we encourage you to just support your local indie wherever you are and pick up the book. Ashleigh, do you know what the new sort of official release date is for that? Is it next week? I think it's next week.
Yes, it's 24th.
The 24th. Thank you. Yeah. So that's when it's due out officially. And so we'll have those as soon as we can. So go ahead and pre-order them and we'll get them into your hands as soon as possible. And I know your local indie, if you're not in Nashville, will do the same. Now
pre-order all their books. It's so hard right now because of all the, their supply chain with so many different industries. I mean, baby formula, all that stuff is happening. So if you're not the books you want, pre-order them, and then they come like a surprise and you forgot that you ordered it.
Exactly.
And it's like a gift to yourself.
You've already paid the credit card bill.
And you've already paid for it. It's just pre-order.
Yeah, so it's just like free books by the time you get it. Yeah, it's very exciting. Things are just like that right now, where best laid plans and then they just come when they come. So it's a great lesson in like patience and grace and surprise books. So that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
That's how I do it. That's right. Yay.
Oh, I got books. Yeah, it's like Christmas, whenever. That's awesome. Oh. Ashleigh, congratulations again. Just last words from you.
Thank you. No, I mean, no last words except thank you so much. And Leah, thank you for just nonstop generosity in reading the book and everything today. Thank you so much.
I'm just so happy for you. I just think it's wonderful.
Thank you. So appreciated. And also I have to say my dad has just been delighted that the word fuckface is on the book jacket of my novel.
Well, listen, my mother is not delighted, so can he call her?
Yeah, they should chat.
She's still getting used to it.
He can kind of work her through that phase.
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome. Ashleigh Pedersen, congratulations again, and thank you. And Leah Hampton, thank you as always.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Malaprop.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's been with us or is watching the video later. We appreciate you. And we look forward to seeing you again in some form or fashion. And please stay safe and well in the meantime. Good night, everybody.
Good night.